All right. Hello to everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Carlo Bobilas and I'll be your moderator for this session. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items to cover about today's presentation. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on demand after the live session. We will provide you with some details at the end, so be sure to stay tuned. Also, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the question and answer panel, where our wonderful panelists are ready to respond. For our agenda today, we will be covering CML, specifically version 2.5, the new release features such as resource pooling and limiting, along with annotations. And during the session, we'll sprinkle in some polls as we'd love to get your feedback. All right, speaking of panelists, please join me in welcoming members of the Cisco Modeling Labs team, which includes and not limited to project management, engineering, development, and support. First off is we have Tom Bryan, John Ernst, Justin Gugliotta, Romal Kotri, and Dalton Ortega. Thank you guys for being on. That brings us to our first poll. Dalton, please go ahead and open up the poll. And in a few seconds, you'll see a Slido pop-up panel towards the right side of your WebEx window. If you have a spare mobile device with a camera, feel free to go ahead and simply scan the QR code that's on the screen to participate. You can also open up a spare web browser or a new tab on your web browser and browse to slido.com and enter the information that's on the screen. So we'll wait for Justin to kind of bring that up. Or I apologize, Dalton, to bring that up. Give him a sec to... How are we doing, Dalton? Oh, there we go.
It doesn't seem like WebEx has added Slido. Says the host hasn't managed it or hasn't added it. So let me just share my screen and you can see the results.
Let me go ahead and, give you the ball.
So yeah, it looks like a big portion of people are using it for training, a lot of network testing, big portion of learning. It's good to see. Yeah, it's a great environment for that. Lab,
awesome.
environments, proof of concepts, automation and testing, anything Nexus 9K. That's good to hear. Yeah, lots of really good results here.
Certification. Yeah, lots of great use cases. I personally use it for certification training. I love the fact that I can simply spin it up and shut down my lab, my topology, all from my laptop. I don't have to worry about purchasing hardware anymore. It's much easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of really good stuff there.
Well, thank you, everyone, for participating. Let me go ahead and take the ball back. And feel free to go ahead and continue to enter your use case for today's session. Okay. So now I'd like to go ahead and actually turn it back to Dalton, who will be our first presenter. Dalton?
Sure.
Give you the ball back.
Thanks, Carl.
Over to you.
Alrighty. So just a really quick intro to CML, then we'll talk about CML 2.5, the new features that we came across. So yeah, CML 2.5, what we've done is we've added an ability to kind of block off your resources, what we call resource pooling, resource fencing and limiting. Essentially what you can do is you can create your, this seems to be out of order. You can create limits around nodes, number of CPUs, and amount of RAM that you want your groups to be able to use. So if you have a certain limit on the number of nodes or the number of CPUs you have available, and you want everybody in your group to be able to, start up labs and start up nodes and not stepping on each other's toes, you can create these kind of limits for your different groups and different users. So yeah, right now what we do is we limit the nodes, CPUs, RAMs, and then you have the ability to either turn on or turn off the ability to connect externally, whether that's external networks or external hardware, etc. So that's the first one we'll be covering, and then we'll talk about annotations. That one's going to be covered by Justin here in a little bit. But yeah, it's a really great way to keep your topologies organized. It's a really great way for documentation, especially if you're sharing this across different groups or classrooms or different teams within your organization. You can group these by layer. You can bring them forward or backwards. You can draw ellipses, boxes, text. So Justin will talk about that in detail in a minute. And then just for a really quick overview of CML, if you're not super familiar with it, it is a browser-based application. Like Carlo mentioned, it's really easy to set up and tear down your labs, and they're persistent between sessions. So that means you can come back and be right where you were last time you were working on that topology. You can use Cisco images, open source images. It's expandable to third party as well, so it's definitely not just a Cisco house. You can use this quite broadly. You can connect with this to physical networks or other simulations. So if you're trying to see what a new piece of hardware is going to look like in your production environment, but you want to test it in production, this is a great way for that. You can tie that piece of hardware into your virtual topology and see how your network behaves. But yeah, no, it's a really great program. So we're really excited to show you this new stuff that we developed. And I saw a lot of the use cases. So a lot of the use cases really fit what we have, intended the product to use. It's great for network operations, getting your new router designs configured virtually before you deploy them. It's great for testing and validation. Obviously, learning is a really big portion of it, whether it be classroom, whether it be individual learning, or if you're trying to bring your organization up to speed on new technologies. CML is a great environment for that. And of course, verifying your network security is always top of mind for any user. So you can simulate those attack points, find fail points, and see how your network behaves upon, said failures. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move over to the demo side of things. Let me share this real quick. We'll get started.
All right, so in this video, I'm going to show you a new feature with CML 2.6, which is called resource pools. For this, I'm logged in as admin. I have a couple of things pre-configured on the machine. I have two groups, a teachers group, students group. I have a bunch of users. So these three are students, these three are teachers, and they are assigned to the groups I just mentioned. Going in here, resource pools, this is the new feature, nothing is defined in here. And if I go back up here and say resource limits, and then no limits have been applied. So there's no pools defined. I, as an admin user, I'm not specifically assigned to any resource pools, but there is also no pool defined and nothing is currently limited in any way. So that's the default, right? So, but I want to show you how to actually limit users and groups in resource with resource limiting or resource pooling. For this, I'm going back to system administration. I'm going into resource pools. And the first thing that I'm going to do is, since nothing is here, I need to click on the add button. So we have two options here. Right now, there's only one. We can define a new template. So that's kind of the prerequisite. We have to have some sort of a template that we base pools off. And since there is none, the only option here is now to create a new template. I need to give it a name. I call it base template. I could give it a description, and I could limit the actual template in a way. So that's kind of the things that the template already defined. So in this case, since this is my base template, I'm not going to limit anything in here. It's just like the anchor for everything else that I want to do. I could if I want, but right now, for this, I do not. So I click on create. And this generates a template entry in here. So as I can see here with the green check mark. So since we have now the template defined, I can go ahead and can say, okay, I want to create now an actual pool with limits that are enforced on the system. So I click on add. And in this case, I don't want to create a new template. I want to create a pool that is based off an existing template. So in this case, this base template. So the next thing here now is I need to decide whether this is going to be a shared pool, the current setting, or an individual pool, this other setting. A shared pool means that all the limits that I define either here or in the template that I'm inheriting from will be shared between the users that I assign to this pool. On the opposite side, if I create or select individual pool here, then all the limits here will be used to create individual pools for all the users that I create, or for all the users that I select. In other words, if I'm going to select my 3 students or my 3 teachers and select the individual pool options, I'm going to end up with 3 individual pools that are created based on these values that are defined here. The combination of what's defined in the base and the combination and combined with the values that are defined in here during this creation process. So in this case, for my students, I want to create a shared pool. So I give it a name, students, and I now create or define limits that should not be exceeded by the students who share this pool. So in this case, I'm going to say, okay, so they should not go beyond 5 nodes, they should not go beyond 10 CPUs, and they should not go beyond 8 gigs of memory. Be aware this is megabytes, this is not gigabytes. So like putting in an 8 is definitely not going very far. So you need to define this in megabytes. So for 8 gigabytes, obviously like 8,000 something. I'm not going to restrict any external connectors. They should be able to use all of them. You can if you want, so you can block all, you can select the ones that are available on the system. So this is a dynamic list. And then hit next. And now we need to define which users should share this pool. So I click on add and click down the drop box. And you can see like here's the individual users. You can search for these users, or you can select the lists down here or the entries down here, which define the groups. And you see like there's 3 users in this student group. So I select this one, all users from students, click on add, and you can tell like Peter, Paul, and Mary are being added. I click create, and now I have created a resource pool called students that limits the nodes, and this is licenses, basically licensed nodes to 5, CPUs to 10, and memory to 8 gigabytes. No external connection. You see there's 3 users. Beware that due to the width of my screen here, there is things over here like the edit and remove buttons. They are like on the right hand side. So this is something that's a bit, should be improved going forward, or you have a wide enough screen to not show the scroll bar. In my case, I needed to increase the font size so that this is readable. So therefore, I have the scroll bar down here. Okay, now this is a shared pool, as I said. Now we want to create another one, which it creates individual pools per user that we assign to that pool when creating. So again, I'm going ahead and say base template, but in this case, I want to create individual pools. Again, I give this a name. In this case, this is our teachers. And so they should be able to create 10 nodes, let's say, again, 10 CPUs, and also, let's say, 16384, somewhat more memory that they can use. Again, to reiterate this, if the base has something defined, like the base template, let's say there is a node limit in there, and I don't specify it in here, then it would inherit the value from the base template. So like 10 in here, nothing in here would still result in 10. Let's say 10 in here and 20 in here would override this with 20. Or nothing in here and something in here would like then use the value from this form here. So just to be very clear. So in this case, I said individual pools, these are the limits, click next, and then again, hit add. And this is my teachers, so I could select them individually, or I could go ahead and could say all users from teachers, click add. I see the users, I hit create. And now in this case, as you can tell, there's not a single line, but there's now 3 lines. The name is stitched together from the prefix that I provided when creating and the username of those users that I selected. And they all have 10 nodes and 10 CPUs and 16 gigabytes of memory. So just to remind you, this is not, if you have only whatever, like 32 or 64 gigabytes of memory and you define they can all use 64 gigabytes of memory, we are not adding these values up and making sure that this fits into your overall system. This just ensures that users who have been assigned such a pool cannot exceed these limits. So it's up to you as an admin to ensure that the sum of these things, like if everyone uses up their limits, like up to the last, let's say, node, that cannot exceed what you actually have on the box. So in this case, like if everyone would use everything, then we have 10, 20, 30, 35 node licenses. So if you don't have 35 node licenses, there's nothing that the system can do. So you need to ensure these values make sense in splitting things up. Okay. Now we've defined all of these things, and now let's see how this is going to be applied. Let's just briefly go back to resource limits here, and we can see as an admin, I have not been assigned to any resource pool, but I can see that the pools that have been defined, how much use is within those pools if the system or if users actually use the system. Right now, nothing is being used. Let's change this. Let's go to log out and log in as Peter. And Peter has 2 labs defined, and I start both of those, and let's see what happens within the resource limits. So this is updated live, and we can tell, okay, so now we are using up CPUs, we are using up RAM, and no node licenses so far, because node licenses are only being used in the second lab that I started. So the first lab is just like 6 Alpine nodes, but they still use CPUs, and they still use memory. So we should see like these are the 6 nodes, and now we have started one iOS node, and that actually uses a license. And now the second node started, and the third node, which is another iOS node, and the fourth node in that lab, which is another iOS node. So we now have 60% usage of the licensed nodes because of the iOS node that I started within the lab, and 100% of the CPUs. So just to make things slightly more interesting, well, it doesn't really matter. So like this is now running, all of these nodes are running, and I'm logged in as Peter. So let's log in as Mary and see what Mary can do. So Mary has a lab of her own. This isn't running, but she shares the resources with all the other students, and she sees that within her group, there is also already some usage, right? So there's 100% usage of CPUs or CPU usage within her assigned resource pool. And she can also see like the users who have been assigned and external connector restrictions, if there are any. And if she goes back here and tries to start this lab, then we'll see what happens. We'll see that it failed to start because resource limits reached for pool students, CPUs. So we have not enough CPU points to actually start her additional VMs in here. The external connectors and the unmanaged switch, they still start because they don't use like any vCPUs, like significant resources, but the server doesn't start, the iOS nodes don't start. And that's because of resource limits that have been enforced using the resource pool or resource limiting feature in CML 2.6. Now, just to complete things off, I'm logging off again, logging in as the admin. And see the labs here from these students as well, because I have like show all undefined or turned on. And I'm going back to resource limits, and now I see that within my student pool, they have used up 3 out of 5 nodes, 100% of their CPUs and something of their memory, like 57%. And so, yeah, so I can see this at a glance, what's going on in my system. I can ensure that a single user doesn't use all the resources within such a system. And I have, various possibilities to assign resources either individually to students, to users, or sharing these resources between a user group or individual users. Thank you.
Well, that was our resource pooling demo. Now we'll go ahead and switch over to Justin, who will talk about our, annotations. Justin, you want to take the ball?
Sure. Thanks, Dalton. Let me go ahead and share my screen 1 second. Okay. Can everybody see the screen okay? Dalton, can you see it? Okay. So with 2.5, another feature that we've added is annotations. And with annotations, you're able to draw various shapes and annotations such as text to be able to describe your topology and logically organize the elements inside your lab. This is a quick demo that I put together just showing kind of a rough overview, some of the different shapes that you can have. So we have rectangles. Rectangles can have rounded corners. You have ellipses. You have text. Where's text? I have a text one here. Text can be rotated as well. And then you can do lines as well. So I don't think I have a line on here, but so the lines, you can do a start and end arrow type. You can change the style, dash, dotted. You can set the thickness. All of the annotations other than text have a background that you can specify as a color. So like if I wanted to change this, I can set it to whatever color I want. This does have transparency as well, so you can see through the different annotation types. As far as being able to see through, we also have layering. So each one of these annotations has a layer that's set. So right now this is -10. If I move this up, it'll go in front of everything. You can move it back. It'll go behind things. So you can do some more complex annotations using layering if you'd like. What else? Another thing that we've added as part of this, it's not annotation specific, but you do have the ability to show grid lines. So that is on by default in 2.5. And that just helps you organize your different annotations and nodes. As far as organization, you also have snap to grid, which is turned on by default. And that works by, you see if I drag a node around as an example, let me just zoom in. You can see it's going to snap to the intersection points on the grid. And then for annotations, as you're drawing them, it's going to snap to the corners there. And that allows you to more accurately place your annotations and nodes. One thing that I've been asked about quite a few times, it's one of those features that's not readily obvious, is if you want to precision place something, so like, for example, like this text, if I want to place it right in the middle, you probably don't want it to snap. So what you can do is if you hold the Alt key while you're dragging an annotation or even a node, it turns off the snapping temporarily, so you can precision place the annotation or node where you like. So if, again, for a node, I can do the same thing. Hold an Alt. If I let go of the Alt key and drag, it's going to snap. And then finally, as far as these settings, you can turn the layers on and off if you wished. So as far as going a little bit more detail, like for text, you can specify font. Like I mentioned before, you can rotate the text. specify the font color, the outline, and yeah, specify the layer. That's pretty much it for annotations.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Justin. We did have one question, I think, is can you show us how you would move a layer up and down the stack?
Sure. So I was using the mouse wheel. That's probably the fastest way. You can be somewhat deterministic. This is just a sample lab that I did. But for example, if I wanted, this is on top. If I move this here, it's on top of this layer, which this is layer height of 28. Let's see, this one's a layer height of -4. So I would have to, if I bring this up to 29, for example, and I can do that by either hitting the up arrow here a bunch of times, I can type it in manually, or I can use the mouse wheel. And then once you deselect it, it'll save it. Now, I guess that's one thing worth mentioning as well. So the editing of these annotations, it's all done through this sidebar. So previously, sidebar was just used for adding of nodes. So if you wanted to drag and drop nodes on the canvas, that's how you would do it. We've added additional functionality with the annotations. So you editing on the sidebar over here. And then once you click away, it's automatically saved.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. So let me go ahead and take the presenter ball back. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you.
And then let's go to our second poll for today. And Dalton, I think it's best to go ahead and have you share the screen. For this, we ask, what new features would you like to see in CML? Again, you can participate by scanning the QR code with your mobile device or browsing to that slido.com and entering that code that you see on screen. So, Dalton, let's go see what new features others are using or would like to see. Wireless LAN emulation, Docker node, XD access capable images. So we do offer SD-WAN for the types of node definitions and image definitions. And that's, let me go ahead and paste that into the chat. We do have a site that kind of has all that information. So let me get that posted. For our panelists that are on, if you see anything on there that you'd like to comment on, please do.
Yeah, it's the same for the WellSee. That is a platform as well.
Yeah.
We don't ship with some of these, but they are available if you can obtain the images. And we have the DevNet portal, which have some of the node and image definitions available as well. I guess we can paste a link into the chat.
Yeah, I think Carlos put in the community repository on there. The FTD is on there as well, the node definition, and then we have a link to the Cisco image as well. Interesting on integrations. I'd like to maybe explore that a little bit more. Is that like third-party integration, or maybe we can type in the chat what kind of integrations you'd like to see?
Yeah, I think custom KVM commands is something that's interesting. I would be curious to know more specifically what the ask would be. It's something that we've been talking about in the back end, the background about, adding that capability. But I think ideally it would be somewhat specific, or I don't know if you want to have like a free form field, because some of that's complicated because it changes with each version of QEMU, and it could be difficult to support, a free form text field where you can type in custom commands. So definitely interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, definitely lots of great use cases and new feature requests. Let's keep this open, if you don't mind, Dalton. But at this time, let's go ahead and take some questions live. So if you do have a question, please use the Q&A panel to submit your questions. If it's missing, because you'll only see the chat, it's located towards the bottom right corner of your screen are 3 dots. Click on those 3 dots of the WebEx window, and you'll see the option to go ahead and enable the Q&A panel. And that way we can go ahead and get those sorted through and answered live. So, all right. If anyone's wondering if we're recording today's session, yes, we are recording today's session. It will be made available on the Cisco Learning Network. At the end of the session, it'll be directed to a post-webinar discussion thread where you can continue the conversation, ask questions and follow up questions, but you'll see the link to where we'll actually be posting those videos in there. Okay. It looks like we do have one question, and not necessarily pertaining in regards to today's subject, but it is covering about upgrading CML for maybe future releases. They ask if it has a seamless and click here to upgrade feature, because currently it's a bit more detailed than that. Would anyone like to unmute and talk about that? Tom, feel free.
Fair enough. So the first part of that answer is it depends. I typed some info about that in the Q&A panel there. The CML supports basically an in-place upgrade. So one of the downloads that you can get from the Software Central site for CML is generally, it depends what version you're looking at, but the more recent versions, it'll be a pkg.zip file, and it'll be listed there as the file for upgrades. So with that, in the UI, the CML admin in the CML UI can just upload that file. You can also use the SCP to upload that PKG file. Both options are listed in the documentation. Once you've uploaded that file, the sysadmin for CML, the person with access to the cockpit, the sort of administrative page, needs to go in and start an upgrade. So that process actually is going to upgrade, possibly some of the underlying packages and CML itself, do database migrations. So when you're running that, you generally want to have everybody off the system. If you're running a multi-user system, stop all your labs, make sure there's a maintenance window when you can perform the procedure. But generally, it's pretty quick. If it's just doing an in-place upgrade between CML, like if you wanted to get to the latest release and you're currently on CML 2.3.0, you can go right to 2.5.1. So the release notes in the documentation page generally list for the release notes that you're looking at, which versions can you just do an in-place upgrade to go from your version to that version. If you are on there's a discontinuity between CML 2.2 and 2.3. So you could in-place upgrade from 2.0 all the way to 2.2.3. Once we got to 2.2.3, going to 2.2, the last release there was 2.2.3. The 2.3.0 was the first release where we switched the underlying CML base system from being CentOS based to Ubuntu Linux based. There's no way to do that in-place upgrade, so in that case, it's a migration. That process is also documented in the documentation. It'll take you to a separate migration script. There's a page on that GitHub site but it's linked straight from the release notes. So if you're still on 2.2, you'll actually need to go through that migration process. You can, if you have enough hardware, you can install the new CML 2.5.1 and then run a migration from your old system to your new one. If you're trying to reinstall in the same system, you can use that migration tool to create an archive of all of your data, wipe that instance, and then install a new CML 2.5, then have it reload all your data. But once you get to 2.3, if you're anything 2.3 or higher right now, it's all in-place upgrade supported. And I post the link there in the Q&A answer panel for the documentation.
Awesome, thank you. All right. Just reviewing the questions. Let's see here. There's one question. It may not necessarily pertain, again, doesn't pertain to the subject for today, but just to help our customers out, for root password or information, I placed a link to the CML documentation in the chat. Do check out that page. If you scroll down to the bottom on the left hand, you'll see the node images that's included and bundled in, along with the default settings for each of those nodes. So you'll find the passwords for that listed there.
Yeah, I think some of the default passwords are in the FAQ in the documentation site. There's also in that the page on there that says VM images for CML Labs. Specific images will give you more information. Note that some of the images, like the bundled Ubuntu image, doesn't have any default account. One needs to be created through the configuration. Usually the default config, when you just drop a node on the canvas, there'll be some default initial configuration. Often that'll create a user account. But in general, you're in control of that default account for a lot of these reference platform types. So if you have no configuration or you wipe the existing config that's there by default, you may not have any account. So pay attention to the documentation. It varies per reference platform, whether one's sort of baked in or whether you need to provide it as part of the initial configuration.
Thank you for that, Tom. This question is more regarding the feature requests. Are there any plans to increase the bandwidth limits on CML images? Current limit 1 megabit per second, I believe, makes it impossible to test web-based applications routed through CML nodes with routing protocols running.
Yeah. You want to answer that, Tom?
You can take a whack at it if you want.
Yeah, so this is a tricky part with CML. We don't control the reference platforms themselves or develop the reference platforms themselves that are included inside of CML. So we're a bit constrained on what the other BUs are doing. It's definitely feedback that we can take to those teams and see if we can get some of those limits lifted or increased somewhat. That said, some of the limits are in place, not just from a licensing standpoint, but also from a performance standpoint as well. So some of these are going to be constrained just because you are doing some level of ASIC or FPGA, simulation ultimately inside, or emulation, I should say, inside of the reference platform. So it's not a purpose-built hardware; it's a software implementation of the routing or switching platform. So some of that's just limits inherent to being virtualized and emulated. So I guess the short answer is I don't think that we can do anything in the short term. We can definitely go back to the BUs and talk to them. And we're constantly doing such things and seeing, if we can get more reference platforms included with the product, and I guess extend some of that functionality inside those reference platforms.
The bandwidth, and notably the bandwidth limit here is per reference platform. So some of them have a much higher bandwidth, well, some of them have a much lower bandwidth limit than others. I think XRV 9000 is one of the culprits where it's quite low. Some of the other ones are higher, like closer to 3 megabits. Yeah, for general protocol testing and configuration testing, often that's sufficient. But if you're hitting specific use cases where it's not working, we're always interested to get concrete kind of feedback, like I'm trying to do this, here's my sample lab, this thing does not work. It gives us a much easier starting point for conversations with those teams that own the individual VM images. For example, in the past, the CSR 1000V, the first images that were included with CML, I think had a 500 kilobit bandwidth cap, and I think that got increased to 1.5 or 2 megabit per second. Based on our feedback, that like the default that they were providing us was low enough that just even trying to set up a topology with 10, 12 nodes, you'd end up with protocols flapping because the bandwidth limits were too low. So we have been able in the past to get some of those bandwidth caps bumped up. But yes, it does help if we have specific cases we can show them of here's things that don't work. We need a higher bandwidth limit.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I do see a lot of questions about, basic troubleshooting support. How do they go ahead and contact CML support? Well, we're dealing with two different products, right? We have Enterprise and then we have the Personal Edition. So for Enterprise, it's best to open up a support case with TAC. As for Personal, we do have and encourage, if you want to just jump on the forum as an Enterprise customer, to jump on the community page on the Cisco Learning Network. So let me get that linked over. I'll put that in the chat. So definitely do take advantage. Again, if you are an Enterprise customer, it's best to open a support case using TAC. And then for Personal, or if you just want to jump on, do jump on the community itself on the Cisco Learning Network. All right. Let's see here. In regards to another feature request, Alexander asked, what would be great to see as well as some guidance on adding third-party images? Tom or Justin?
Yeah, so there
Actually,
is some
guys,
information
yeah, Tom. So I have created a document for adding third-party images. So it's still in the draft version. But yeah, so I'm not sure how we can share that document here, or I can post it in the CML troubleshooting team space.
Right. So there is some documentation right now in the user guide underneath. I think it's this user guide page around custom VM images and then creating new node definitions. It's unfortunately a little bit fragmented between those two pages. So we have had feedback that that's maybe not clear enough. We have some initial drafts of versions of this that right now we were talking today about the CML 2.5 release. The 2.6 release is coming out soon. So with that 2.6, we'll probably be updating some of this documentation, including getting further info about that feature. Ramal, if you've got specific people reaching out to you, if they could get in touch with you either through a TAC case or through the forums or the internal people through email, you can. It'd be good to get a few people to try, that set of instructions and go through and see whether that's more clear.
Yep, sure.
There's one post that says how about adding the CCIE VMs as standard? I think that just make the RefPlat image to download a little bit too big. But what are your thoughts on, and anyone in the panelists, adding it to the repository that is available on the download page for the software?
I'm not sure I understand the ask. Yeah.
So CCIE images are, I guess, for certification studies. There's a lot of people, CML personal users that use it, again, for certification studies. So we do offer VMs, and I think they're Linux nodes that are custom built by the exam program managers.
Okay.
So typically, you can just download them straight from the article that's on the Cisco Learning Network. It's on Cisco themselves, but that's a great idea about maybe potentially adding it to the same repository that houses CML, so it's just all in one download page. I don't think it'll be a great idea to add it to the RefPlat, right? Because it'll be too big.
No, yeah. So we have a longer term thing around making this a little bit smoother especially for sort of optional images like this. The one that I think is on our radar for adding for download for CML this summer is I think it's called the CWS image. It's basically for the DevNet, either DevNet Associate or whatever that certification. That's as far as I understand, a VM with a bunch of bundled tools in there. But it is quite large. It's many gigabytes all by itself, I think. So it'll not be on the RefPlat ISO. It'll be a separate image that you'll need to go through that process to SCP the image to the system, and then either add it as an alternate VM image for like your Ubuntu node, or add it as a whole separate node type.
Thank you. And that was a great question. I'll make sure to bookmark that. All right. And I think we've covered all the questions for today. Yeah. Let's all move on to our next steps. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. So next steps, we welcome you to stay in touch. Do scan that QR code to opt in to our email communication. Let me go ahead and paste that link into the chat as well. So opt in. I'll leave that up there. I want to thank our presenters, panelists, the whole team for bringing your knowledge to the Cisco community. If you do have a question, I'll keep the Q&A window open for a couple more minutes. For even more tutorials, demonstrations, and future webinars, please do visit the Cisco Learning Network. Let me place where today's recording will be hosted. Let me get that here. Do bookmark that link. At this time, you'll also be directed to a survey, so we do encourage you to take the time to participate. It'll also be included in that follow-up email. Justin, Dalton, or any of the panelists, would you like to say anything before we, I guess, close the session?
Just thanks everybody for taking the time. I know everybody's busy and taking the time to take a look at CML 2.5 and the new features.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time here, and thanks for the feedback on how we could improve CML in the future. I think that was really helpful.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and until next time, we'll see you then. Take it easy.